All right, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us. Over the past year, a group of states, including Illinois, Pennsylvania, Texas, and Virginia, have worked as part of an evaluation learning community to plan and conduct studies that will inform important issues in their states and across the country. Today, they'll share details of what they studied and what they learned. Please note that this webinar will be recorded. And now I'd like to introduce a few AIR staff who will be facilitating today's webinar. Larry Condelli and Emily Eisenberg will be watching the chat and making sure that your questions get to the state team, and technical support will be available throughout the webinar from Shoshana, who will also be monitoring the chat. Larry and Emily are going to introduce themselves, and then Shoshana is going to take care of some technical housekeeping before we get started.
Well, hello, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us today. We're very excited to hear from our states that have been working so hard over the past year. And as you know, I'm the project director for the NRS Support Project. So I'll mostly just be listening and helping answer questions and maybe some concluding remarks at the end, but I'm going to turn it over to our presenters soon. And I'm here with Emily Eisenberg. Emily.
Hi, I'm Emily. I'm located in the Chicago area, so I'm actually fairly physically close to our Illinois team. And I've been working on data and statistical models with the NRS project and have been part of this evaluation learning community. And I'm excited also to see what everybody has today.
All right. Today's presenters will include staff from Illinois, Pennsylvania, Texas, and Virginia. Kathy Olson-Tracy from Illinois will talk about the PD and promising practices in her state for developing, implementing, and scaling IET programs. And then Christine Hoke from Pennsylvania explores the relationship between teacher PD on college and career readiness standards and educational functioning level gains among their learners. Next, Angie Stout from Texas will describe the impact of their comprehensive intake services approach on the progress of adult learners. Last, Kate Rollander and Elizabeth Severson-Irby from Virginia explore the relationship between teacher PD for college and career readiness standards, instructional practices, and learner outcomes in Virginia. And now I'm going to turn it over to our first presenter. Take it away, Kathy.
Well, hi, everybody. Give me 1 second to share my screen, and I will be ready to show you all the great work that Illinois has done. So I just did this a second ago, so I should be able to share this. Here we go. And I'm going to also go from the beginning. So I'm hoping that you can all see my screen. And in Illinois, we worked with our professional development network, Dr. Amy Julian, Bevan Gibson, Sarah Goldhammer. From the state staff, we included Angela Gerberding. And together we worked to look at what was happening in Illinois as far as some of our technical assistance as it relates to IETs. As a part of our overview, we were looking at the effectiveness of the professional development and technical assistance on our version of IETs and IELCEs and apprenticeships. And we defined success by the number of IETs, the number of student completions, and the number of transitions to post-secondary education. We were really looking at trying to define the impact of professional development relating to the scalability and effectiveness in all of this. Our process was quite extensive. We developed and distributed program surveys to all of the adult education programs across the state. And we were looking at what was going on with the Transitions Academy. And we also found it was tied into a gap analysis and look at our current data to determine the gaps in data collection so that we can continue to maintain the evaluation of professional development on this target topic. By completing a data analysis, we were able to look at some of the outcomes, and we were pretty happy with where we landed. Our study questions in particular were focusing on participation in the Transitions Academy, what that looks like, and does this relate well to these completion goals that we're looking for. And then finally, we were looking at promising practices. You know, if we're going to look at the outcomes and the benefits, we're going to try to identify as well as what are we doing that's working. So to define this to begin with, our Transitions Academy is a year-long process, and it's a partnership with our professional development network with Dr. Amy Julian, Evan Gibson, Sarah Goldhammer, and the ICCB staff. They provide customized training and professional development for all of our programs, specifically focusing on these ICAPs. During this Transitions Academy, the goals are to ensure we expand services to multiple populations of students, connect students to career pathways and programs of study, to ensure we have an open dialogue between the adult education and career and technical education, to expand college and career readiness services. I mean, there's a whole host of things that are focusing on. And this year-long process allows us to provide very high-level customized technical assistance to all of our programs. The expectation for programs who choose to participate is that they participate entirely through the program. They participate in the launch. We convene the academy at the beginning of the fiscal year. We follow logic models, and we help them develop follow the logic model that will go from the beginning development to implementation and evaluation. We provide ongoing discussion and training throughout the year. And our training and support occurs through prior to COVID on-site visits, now a lot more of the virtual meetings, customized professional development through webinars. And we also did individual technical training. We also develop and disseminate resources and tools to programs so that they have them and they can use them at their level. What we were very excited to see through the evaluation process is that professional development through this academy has had a positive relationship linked to all of our study questions. We saw that programs that participated in the Transitions Academy had increased success. I want to be careful in how we phrase that. Increased success in their deployment and scalability of their ICAPs and IETs. And we found that the Transitions Academy positions colleges and programs of study to have a broader spectrum of programs at their college. Okay, there we go. Whoops. So some of the questions we asked, some of the questions that we asked were about having programs indicate what was working best for them and what barriers they had. And what we're seeing with some of the more common barriers that you're probably familiar with at your program level are barriers in funding. But we saw the resources that helped them work through the barriers. What we were looking for was the professional development. We talked about the technical assistance and the ICAPS website, which is kind of a repository for all of our resources, and webinars. These are the tools they found the most valuable, that professional development was the highest indicator from the programs of what resources helped them. We're also specifically honing in on what resources professional development was meaningful. And they found the webinars and the resources, but the Transitions Academy, again, was at one of the highest levels of outcomes, what they liked the most. So what we did when we were looking at all of this is we answered. We asked people to attend the Transitions Academy. We provide grants to scale up their programs. We use data that indicates that online learning is in high demand. So we're starting to help programs with these types of resources to work towards their IET success. Some of the things that we saw from programs is the success of the Transitions Academy helped them define the right teams, who to put in charge of the IETs, how to build those internal relationships. Building on the outcomes of what we saw, we focused our Transitions Academy this year on some of the promising practices. We learned in our process is when we combine our technical assistance and our professional development and feature programs who have boots on the ground, who are doing the work, who are sharing their experiences, we have a much higher relationship between the outcomes we're hoping for and what the programs are needing. We have seen some really exciting bridging opportunities and what student programs are doing. And we get to share this through this Transitions Academy. So more than simply being a way for us to output information, it's a very, very interactive process where we highlight the expectations of programs. We find the programs that are doing the best work with levels of innovation, and then we disseminate that information, and then we provide the technical assistance to help programs adapt those ideas to their local level. As we moved into the pandemic, and we decided that programs needed additional supports and how to move forward with the COVID-19 and the pandemic. So building off of what we learned from our gap analysis, what we saw from the survey results, what we saw from the promising practices, we were able to bring all of that together and continue our services as we move forward. And we did the how the band plays on as we worked through designing services for students through the pandemic. So as we move forward, we're going to continue to gather these promising practices and be able to disseminate them. We continue to use the ICAPS website as a repository for the wealth and the breadth of information that we develop and share. We will continue the Transitions Academy and webinars through a creation of learning communities so that people can continue to network and foster these relationships. But certainly we found that that positive relationship with the Transitions Academy and to the student outcomes is something that we will continue to support, recognizing that all of these pieces are linked together. And we're moving forward in a very strategic direction. Now, a lot of the slides that I have here are put for you as a document, a PDF, so that you can kind of go through them in more depth and see what we've done, what the concrete questions were, and what some of our outcomes were. But ultimately, what we have discovered through this process that we will apply to other areas within the adult education is the process of evaluating our ongoing and continued professional development with a specific target in mind. We will continue to work through and continue to evaluate the Transitions Academy so that we can adapt and ensure that we're always maintaining the highest quality and we're always linking our outcomes and our expected anticipated outcomes and student achievement to the professional development and technical assistance that we provide. Now that's a very, very quick summary of a lot of work that our team put together in a year, digging deep into the data and ensuring that we were on target with what our program's needs were. Therefore, we were on target with what our students' needs are. So we always kept that at the forefront of our decision is what do we want from our students? What do we want from our programs? And then how do we provide that support so that our programs can implement these complex programs? Now that was a very, very quick overview. So I would love to hear your questions about what you're thinking and how we can kind of provide you more information.
All right, everyone. Thank you, Kathy. Please enter your questions or comments in the chat, and Emily will be looking for them and making sure that they get answered. So while we wait for that, I will ask you a question myself, Kathy. And that is, what were some of the main findings in your study that you want to make sure people know?
Well, I think from my perspective, and I'm going to ask our team to chime in because they're all here with me. One of my biggest aha moments was our gap analysis. That's not what we intended to start, but when we started getting our hands in there, we started looking at who's reporting and what we know is happening versus what's being reported. And as you know, you can't really do a lot of evaluation on data when the data is not there. So the first thing I would suggest is to really do a gap analysis on the data to make sure you have what you need. Secondly, what I think was very important and my aha moment was being able to at least validate that what we're doing as far as our professional development and that year-long academy where we devote so much time and effort actually is connected to and has a relationship with student outcomes. So if you look at the breadth, depth of services we provide, but it's all interconnected. Does that answer your question? And then my Illinois people, please chime in.
It does. I was wondering if you could say something about the Transitions Academy in particular. For example, what were some of the strongest components of that based on what you saw?
I think the strongest component was the fact that programs could come together and share promising practices and talk to each other. What we're learning is that programs need models from other programs, what they're really doing, what's happening, so that they can copy that. And what that promising practices is leading to those virtual learning communities. Those promising practices are leading to this ongoing focus of bringing in programs that are doing the good work so that we can highlight that and then help other new programs or struggling programs emulate the ideas and the strategies that are working.
And sharing promising practices is one of the priorities.
So my team, anybody have anything they want to share? No. Okay, we need to, can we unmute my team, please? They're not able to share their answers.
We also have a few questions from the chat after the after any comments from the Illinois team about the last question.
Okay.
Okay, here. Does the Illinois team want to speak, or should I start with the chat question?
Go ahead with the questions and I'll let them answer the questions.
Okay, so we have a question from Jeanette. I can't see all the last names, so I'm just going with first names here. Why did you choose to study that particular area as opposed to other areas to conduct your study? And do you anticipate being able to broaden your study to other PD areas to replicate the results?
Okay, well, I will answer that one. We chose to use the Transitions Academy because prior to this, we had done some research working with AIR on our standards-based instruction. So we would already had done a deep dive into some of that data. So looking at the priorities of what we would need to accomplish every year, one of the key areas is ensuring students obtain credentials, industry recognized credentials. So once we found out that our standards-based instruction had a relationship to student outcomes, the next thing we wanted to look at was the programs focusing on the IETs. So those were why we picked that as a priority.
Okay, here's the next question. What was the time frame for the evaluation and how many cycles of the academy did you look at?
So I'm going to let any of our team members who want to look at that one. Okay, it sounds like we might be having some difficulty trying to get everyone connected. But what I will tell you is we went through several years of our Transitions Academy because we were looking at several years of attendance at the academy, and we were looking at IET development and who had a formal one developed. So we were going back several years. So it wasn't just a single year of the ICAPS. I don't think we went back any further than about 3 years. I think it was about 3 to 4 years we looked back into our programs to see what was happening.
Okay. And then
Shoshana has asked that your teammates raise their hand in Zoom, and then she will know who they are to unmute them.
Okay. Okay. So my Illinois team, if you could do that, that would be lovely.
yeah, and we have a response in the chat that they went back, the Illinois team went back to 2017 to examine program participation.
I know we went back several years to look at this, so it was a multiple year program. We've been doing the Transitions Academy for a long time, always focusing on promising practices and staying current with current trends and ideas.
So I think I'm unmuted now. Oh, go ahead, Bevan.
Go ahead, Amy.
Go ahead,
Now
Amy,
you let us
first.
talk, everyone. Yes, my name is Amy Julian, and I'm part of the team, and I'm very excited to share our results. We have been doing the Transitions Academy for quite some time. We wanted the data to be consistent, and one of the things that happened in the state of Illinois in fiscal year 2016 was a budget impasse. So we knew that that year would be an outlier. So when we looked at our data collectively, we went back to 2017, and then in addition to that, we did examine and ask questions about data prior to that interruption. But really, when you look at some of the results that we shared today, and they talked about that they really enjoyed the Transitions Academy and face-to-face professional development. Obviously, in the year that we've been given this year, we were not able to do that face-to-face professional development, but we have been able to use Zoom as we are today and be in contact with individuals and really provide high quality professional development for the system in this current climate that we're in. And Bevan, what else did I miss?
What I was going to share was that the promising practices that Kathy referenced is something that has been useful. We've actually used a lot of those promising practices from those programs in our Transitions Academy to actually carry others forward and help them learn from their peers. That's a significant piece of the Transitions Academy. So then we've shared those promising practices on our websites so that they actually, people can go on as we move forward into our future Transitions Academies, that everyone learns and therefore thereby improving every single year as we go.
And Bevan, if you want to speak a little bit to the mentor-mentee program that we have.
Yes, we have a mentor and mentee program that is part of the Transitions Academy, and we use programs that have career pathways that are similar to each other. So if you are a new participant in the Transitions Academy, we link them up with an existing program that is running excellently, having and forged ahead of everyone. And so we hook them up. They can actually, in years past, whenever pre-COVID, they actually could visit those programs and observe those programs in action. And what we're doing this year is that they're actually doing Zoom meetings with those classes so they can observe those. The people mentoring them have guidelines that I send to them as to what a good mentor is and how they should go about doing that. And then the mentees get guidelines as well to guide them in actually asking questions of their mentors to help them go about developing their program or scaling up their program. So it has worked really well. The use of peers and successful programs has really bode well with the Transitions Academy in years past and in moving forward.
And it really strengthens the program too. Angela made a point in the chat that programs really want to hear what is happening in a real program and not necessarily what this, the state level people believe should be happening. And that's one of the things that we found in our professional development that has come as a result of this study is some professional development around recruitment, retention, and engagement. And instead of saying what the state expects them to do, we're sharing with them what their other programs and peers are doing. And so that's been very successful for us as well. And it really builds on the work of the Transitions Academy, which, as Kathy has said, is a year-long endeavor. It's not a one and done. It builds on what is defined as professional development within the Perkins Law and really talks to the point of how do we engage individuals and then move them through a course of content and knowledge.
And I think the one point that I would like to make is that Transitions Academy is always changing. Kathy said that we kind of keep current with everything. And this year we've added virtual learning communities as part of that for both our bridge programs that are in the Transitions Academy, as well as our integrated ICAPS programs. And so that those groups of people will get together and learn, and then actually have chances to talk with each other as they go through this course of this year. So,
Well, and this is Kathy. I wanted to answer one of the questions and comments is when we bring in programs to showcase what they're doing, we are looking at the quality of the program and the alignment with what they're implementing versus what our expectations are. So we're using model programs that are hitting all the high notes, so to speak, because they're doing what we expect them to do. They're actually implementing it at the local level, but they've harnessed all of the resources together. So there is a correlation between what we expect and what the programs are doing by who we select to be part of this. The second thing, there was a question in there in the chat feature about, and I'm going to try to get to that. It was, what measures do you look at to study implementation effectiveness? So we, Amy, Bevan, would you like to answer what we actually looked at to determine what something was effective?
Amy?
Okay. Well, while we're trying to answer that, I will tell you.
Are you able to hear? I didn't.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I got muted and then double muted myself. So for program effectiveness, we were looking at attendance. We were looking at what the programs. So we did a cross comparison, and so we asked the questions. So I snagged out some of the survey results there, but the full study, which our fantastic research team that was with us. So thank you to everyone from AIR who really helped with that. We sent out a survey and we asked not only if you attended the Transitions Academy, but who from your committee, who from your team attended that Transitions Academy. And then was your program, like, what we wanted to also see, or one of our fun questions that kind of, when we got really big pictures, I know we all did in this, was really looking at, if you attended the Transitions Academy, did that impact your ICAPS and IET program success? And did you have more programs, or were they more robust programs because of the supports from professional development? And so that's really looking at how we were trying to gauge that percentage of participation.
All right. Thank you, Kathy and team and everyone for sending us your questions. I am going to transition us to Christine Hoke from Pennsylvania.
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. Pennsylvania's study was about the relationship between teacher participation in CCRS professional development and student educational functioning level gains. We spent, like everybody, a lot of time and money in the past 6 years or so implementing standards-based instruction, and we participated in a lot of the CCRS initiatives that were offered through Octave, and we really just kind of wanted to know, was it making any kind of impact? Next slide, please. Just before I delve in, I just wanted to introduce, we were a small team, there was 3 of us. So it was myself, Amanda Harrison, our state director, and we were the original team, and then pretty quickly realized that we needed some statistical help. We added Kathy Kassab to the team, and really adding her was key because it enabled us to dig even deeper into the data than we would have been able to without her. So I was really grateful for that help. Next. Our research questions were they're on the screen. Are teachers of students who participated in formal CCRS PD more likely to make EFLs than other students, EFL gains than other students? And just quickly, when I talk about EFLs, I'm talking about pre-post assessment match. I'm not talking about any data related to any other kind of EFL, exit and entry into post-secondary. This is just strictly pre-post assessment data. And our second question was, does the relationship between CCRS, PD, and EFL gains vary by type of program? So between, ABE, ASE students and ESL students. And another note before I really go into the results and the study, the first 2 years of CCRS PD was not really designed for ESL teachers. It was, directed at ABE, ASE teachers. We didn't really start doing like ESL modifications or add-ons until we were about 2 years in. But we figured since we had the data, we decided to include the ESL students anyway, and just kind of see what came out of it. And then along the way, we realized we had data on duration and intensity, so we decided to see if amount of participation in PD had any effect. Next, please. So for this project, we used 2 data sources. We used eData, which is PA's data collection system for all of the data we report to the NRS. And then we have a separate PD database that we use to track participation in PD. We looked at 4 years worth of teacher PD data and 4 years worth of student data. And as you can see from the numbers, we had a fairly, I think, large data set to work with. It seemed large to me. Next. The teacher participation data included teacher participation in 12 different CCRS PD events. The events varied in duration and in type of event that we used, and when looking at the amount of PD. Each teacher was assigned a sort of PD start date based on their first participation in any CCRS PD. eData contained all of the student data, pre-post, EFL gain, amount of gain, and then the teacher-student assignments, which obviously we needed, so we knew which teachers taught which students and when they taught them. Next slide, please. I wanted to mention something about the baseline equivalency, which was one of the things that we were asked to do when reviewing our data. Kathy found that students who had 1 or more teachers with the PD intervention differed at baseline from those who did not have a teacher with the PD. Their pretest EFLs were higher, and they had a significantly sort of different levels coming in. So we controlled for those factors during the analysis when we were examining the relationship between the teacher participation and the PD and the EFL gains. But the charts you're going to see that I'm going to show in the results section are based on the unadjusted, because Kathy did some regressions, and based on those regression coefficients, the unadjusted percentages are still a fair representation of the adjusted percentages in terms of the overall results. So we use those tables. Next, please. All right, the good part, right? The meat of the thing, the results. So looking at just the first year that a student had a pre-post match, students who had 1 or more teachers with CCRS PD were more likely to have an EFL gain than students who did not have a class with a teacher with the CCRS PD. You can see on the figure that 69% of ESL students and 72% of ABE students who had a PD teacher had an EFL gain. And in contrast, students who did not have a class with a PD teacher, only 66% had an EFL gain. So for ABE, ASE, it was a 6% difference, and for ESL students, it was a 3% difference. Next slide. When we look at the last year a student had a pre-post match, this number decreases somewhat. The results are similar for ABE students, but different for ESL students when we look at assessment data from the last year that a student had the pre-post match. ABE students with a PD teacher were still more likely to have an EFL gain than students who did not have a PD teacher. You can see that it was 71% versus 65% for those without. But in contrast, for the percentage of ESL students with a PD teacher were no more likely to have an EFL gain. It was 64% for both groups. So still a 6% difference for ABE, but no difference for ESL. Next. So then we looked at the amount of gain. So the prior two slides, we were just looking at gain, like yes or no. Yes, gain, no, not gain. But now we're looking at the amount of gain. So, 2, 3, 4 or more gains. For ABE ASE students, having one or more teachers who participated in the PD was related to the amount of the EFL gain. The percentages are greater for students with 1, 2 or more EFL gains. And it might be hard to look on the chart, but you can see that by comparing the red and yellow bars in the chart. For the ESL students, having one or more teacher with the PD was unrelated to the amount of EFL gain. The percentage is greater for students with 1 gain. So that's your second set of bars there. But for students with 2 or more, it made no difference. And you can see that in the third grouping and the fourth grouping by comparing the blue and gray bars, you'll see that they're the same. The percentage is the same. And these results held regardless of whether it was the student's first or last year. Next, please. Then we looked at whether it mattered if a student had a greater percentage of teachers with PD. And we found that for ABE ASE students who had a higher percentage of teachers with the PD, those students had greater EFL gains, but for the ESL students, it was not related to the amount of EFL gain. Next. And the final thing we looked at was if there was an effect of the amount of PD participation. And here's where things got a little weird. So if we include all ABE ASE students, the amount of PD does seem to have a relationship with EFL gain. But the positive relationship between the amount of PD and the student EFL gains could then be due to the differences between students who had one or more teachers with the PD and those who did not. So the ones who did not could have been skewing the results. So if we excluded them, the teachers, the students who did not have a teacher with the PD from the analysis, then all of a sudden the positive association disappears for the ABE ASE. And even worse and less encouraging was for ESL students, somehow then there was a negative association, which seems counterintuitive to me, but the results are the results. So I think Kathy and I are going to dig into this analysis a little more, moving forward. I don't have an answer at this point as to why that happened. Next slide, please. So this slide has a lot of words on it. I tried to highlight the important ones. The results indicate that ABE ASE students who had at least one teacher participate in the PD were more likely to have an EFL gain and to have greater gains in the amount of EFL gain. And the ABE students who had a greater proportion of teachers were more likely to have a gain and to have greater gains. And these results were apparent even when just ABE students who had one or more PD teachers were included. So this means that among ABE ASE students, those who had a greater proportion with the PD were more likely to experience EFL gains. Overall, ESL students who had one or more teachers were also likely to experience an EFL gain. But in contrast, we found that the amount of the PD didn't seem to matter and somehow affected the ESL students negatively. So in summary, teacher participation in CCRS PD has a positive relationship with student EFL gains and the amount of EFL gains, but the amount of PD does not seem to have a positive relationship. And overall, the relationships that I mentioned were greater for ABE ASE students than they were for ESL students. Next slide, please. A couple limitations and other factors that should be mentioned. We didn't really delve into teacher characteristics other than yes PD or no not PD. So factors such as full-time versus part-time or years of experience were not considered. Who knows who was assigned to take the PD? Maybe only full-time teachers were, we don't know. And the students differ as well in some ways that we didn't examine. For example, we might want to look more closely at student barriers and control for that. We could also see if the type of PD was a factor. It was year-long institute more effective than simple webinars? Did events that included a coaching aspect seem to make a difference? We have this huge data set, and I have all that data, so I would like to use it to investigate some of these factors and see if there's any relationship to the results. Next slide, please. And then just finally, some next steps. As I mentioned, I'd like to use the same data set to dig in a little deeper at some of the factors I mentioned. I definitely want to take a closer look at that negative association and see what's going on there. Harder to do, but ultimately probably extremely useful would be to look at some of the other outcomes, such as high school equivalency or employment. Does PD have any effect on those outcomes? Those data sets are not quite as readily available, so I'm not sure, but I think we should try. And this study only examines CCRS PD, but we also offered standards PD for English language proficiency standards. If we include the English language proficiency standards PD, would the ESL student gain numbers change? I was actually surprised that the PD made a difference for the ESL, EFL gains, since very little of the PD was actually directed at that audience of teachers. So it was nice to know that, maybe they got something out of it. And I guess finally, it would be great if another state would do the same study and see if they got similar results. I'll have a full report forthcoming with all sort of the nitty-gritty details of the analysis. So I think somebody could, copy that and try it for themselves if they wanted to. And that's it. Thank you.
Christine, I have one question before we take more questions, and
Sure.
that is, do you remember in general the range of participation in PD? Like, was it from 1 hour to 5 weeks, or was it a much more narrow range?
So there's two ways you could look at that. I think the event with the fewest number of hours was like 6, spread out over several webinars. And then, some of the events were upwards of 22 hours, which included like 2 intense face-to-face days plus some follow-up later on.
All right. Emily, do we have any questions?
Yeah, we're getting a few comments and questions in the chat. So one question was, is there a difference between ABE and ESL PD?
So yes and no. For when we first implemented the CCRS standards and action process, we only had that PD was not really geared towards ESL teachers, but I think that ESL teachers did attend, as shown by the fact that there were teachers, PD teachers that were matched up with ESL students. So it wasn't until about the second year of the standards PD that we started doing things specifically geared towards looking at CCRS, but with like, here's how as an ESL teacher you could do this.
Okay, we have a few more comments and questions. We have a comment from Jeanette Chandler, who says that she thinks that New Hampshire can examine the same or similar relationships.
Okay.
That sounds exciting.
Yeah.
And then we have a question from Maureen Whalen. Did you encounter a problem with teachers getting PD but not staying with the program for 2 years, so the impact of the PD was reduced?
So I don't know the answer to that question. It is conceivable that Kathy Kassab knows the answer to that question. She's the statistician and she is on the webinar. So Kathy, if you want to raise your hand, and Shoshana could unmute you and you could answer. Or maybe you don't have the answer to that readily available. I mean, teachers drop out all the time, right? So I'm sure that happened. I just don't know the extent to which it happened.
Yeah, this is Kathy. There was a lot of variability in terms of the amount of PD that individual teachers took. I mean, that was one of the things I looked at just, when looking at just trying to figure out, especially that negative relationship, just looking at all possibilities. But there was a lot of, and I don't know offhand, but I'm sure teachers dropped out because there was just so much of it. I mean, there was a lot. Teachers differed in the number of events they participated in and the number of hours they participated in.
Thanks, Kathy.
Sure.
If anyone else has questions, feel free to enter that in a chat. I had a question. I was just wondering if you could tell us more about how you plan to use your findings for future planning for PD, and if there's any sort of connections you've thought about between what you've found so far and what you might want to do with PD in the future.
I think I need more information. So we just really finished getting all these results a couple weeks ago. So I haven't really, I'll be honest, I haven't really had a time to let it all sink in yet and really think about what it means. I think there's two things I would like. I would like the numbers redone, including the PD that was directed at the ESL teachers specifically. And I would like the data on if the type of PD made a difference, because those things could change my planning. I'm the state PDS coordinator. I'm not really the data person. So those things could perhaps change my planning for the future.
And also, so the pandemic hit and a lot of things have changed with the pandemic. And was this PD taking place before the pandemic? And if so, how has the PD changed since the pandemic hit?
So this was all pre-pandemic data. But we have gone virtual with all of our PD. We were already planning to do virtual professional learning communities this year instead of face-to-face things because we wanted cross-state, work. So we wanted people in Pittsburgh to be able to talk to people in Philadelphia, and doing that face-to-face is just obviously, that's a 6-hour drive or so. So we had already kind of moved to that anyway. We were, a lot of the PD we do was already moving to an online, and it was really just taking a couple of the face-to-faces and trying to figure out, but I don't have any data on that yet at all.
And we have another question from the chat. Do you plan to, this is from Nancy Olson. Do you plan to look at PD and student retention?
I wasn't, but I am now. Thanks, Nancy. That's a great idea.
That is a great idea. All right, any last questions? Any final words from you, Christine?
I'm glad this is over.
Okay.
The presentation part, not the study part. I'm going to do a million of these things now, but.
Excellent, that's what we want to hear. All right, I think
Great.
we're going
Thank
to
you.
transition now to Angie Stout in Texas. Let me get your slides up here. All right. Whenever you're ready, Angie.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Angie Stout, and I'm with the Texas Workforce Commission. Our study is titled The Impact of Comprehensive Intake Services on the Progress of Adult Education and Literacy Students. Next slide, please. Throughout the presentation, we'll go through these sections covering the research questions, study methodology, results, and discussion of the findings. Next slide. Comprehensive Intake Services, or CIS, including teachers conducting orientations, new students speaking with current or former program participants, one-on-one interviews between teachers and students, and discussing positive and negative prior educational experiences have been found in prior studies to improve student performance in the adult education and literacy program. Next slide. The AEL orientation process and the first 3 weeks of class instruction, which we will refer to as intake, can be critical in helping students establish program goals, manage program expectations, and feel connected to their peers and instructors. Factors including a feeling of community, a clear purpose, and a sense of stability have been found to improve engagement, retention, and in some instances, also student program performance. The aim of this study was to determine if certain types of services provided during intake may result in positive performance outcomes for Texas AEL students. Next slide. We developed 2 research questions for this study, including research question 1, is there a significant difference in the average number of gains, average number of high school equivalency tests passed, or average number of days to receive a gain between providers who offer different levels of CIS? Our second research question asks, are there combinations of specific CIS that show a significant difference in the average number of gains, average number of HSE tests passed, or average number of days to receive a gain? Next slide. AEL program participants who took classes between July 2018 and June 2019 were selected for the study as comprehensive intake services were commonly used by grantees that year, and it was the most recent complete program year when we began this study. The study design was quasi-experimental, meaning the students were not randomly assigned to different treatment groups, but they were randomly selected from the different treatment groups. A matched pairs design was also used, so a student in one group was matched to a student in the other group based on a series of 26 demographic characteristics, including sex, race, age, and education levels, to make them as comparable as possible. Next slide. Texas Workforce Commission staff developed and sent a survey to all 98 program providers asking questions about the type of services offered to students during intake. We received results from 26 providers, and we used the results to divide students from those providers into 2 sets of groups with 2 levels in each group. The first set divided students into an intensive level of CIS or a moderate level of CIS. The second set divided the students into a group where all the intake services offered were at the intensive level, or a group where no intensive level intake services were offered. Each group between the 2 sets had the same number of students. AEL student data was collected from the database operated by the Texas Workforce Commission that houses AEL program data. Next slide. A series of t-tests were run to compare the means between the 2 groups for the number of gains received, the number of HSE tests passed, and the number of days to receive a gain. To answer research question 1, we used data from 26 of the overall 38 survey questions. Those questions were selected based on what we learned from the literature review about which intake services are most effective and the ones that were the most pertinent to the study. To answer research question 2, we divided the data into 3 subsets. 2 of these subsets, the 75th percentile and the largest effect sizes, used a varying level of effect sizes, which were calculated from the t-test run for each individual survey question. Effect sizes can be useful as they show the strength of a relationship or the magnitude of an intervention, such as the CIS. The third subset used data from the survey questions that were found to be the most impactful based on prior similar research studies. Next slide. Here you can see the average number of gains, average number of HSE tests passed, and the average number of days to receive a gain for the 4 analysis groups we examined. The yellow highlighted numbers show the better or more desirable outcomes, and asterisks denote a statistically significant result, meaning the outcome did not occur randomly or by chance. For every breakout but one, the average number of gains for the overall analysis level, students in the intensive or the CIS groups had more positive outcomes. As you can see, there was not a big difference in the average number of gains between any of the analysis groups. With regards to the average number of HSE tests passed, students in the intensive level of the overall analysis group fared best with just over 3 tests passed. Depending on the type of HSE test taken, there could be 4 or 5 individual test components. Students in the CIS level of the literature review subset had the shortest average number of days to receive a gain of 58.76 days. Next slide. Overall, we found that students who received more CIS achieved a higher number of gains, completed more HSE tests, and received a gain in a shorter amount of time than students with low levels of CIS. Differences for the number of gains received between the service levels were minimal, which could be due to program policy that states only one official gain is needed per year. We received survey data back from only 27% of providers statewide. Therefore, the results are not generalizable to the state as a whole. Next slide. Students who passed the highest number of HSE tests received at least 75% of these groups of services at intake. They included having small orientation class size, classes beginning within 1 week of orientation, students getting one-on-one interviews with program staff, students participating in activities together and being able to meet their teachers during orientation, students speaking with current or former AEL students, discussing positive or negative prior educational experiences, setting goals and planning specific gains, students being given details about the academic portion of the program as well as any available support services, and providers offering either managed enrollment, once classes begin, no new students are able to enroll, or hybrid managed enrollment, where students may enroll and enter classes at specified intervals. Next slide. Students with the shortest number of days to reach a gain received all of these services during intake, including meeting their teachers during orientation, speaking with current or former AEL program students, discussing their positive or negative prior educational experiences, development of the individual training, education, and career plan, initial goal setting and identifying a planned gain, identifying SMART goals, and collecting information about each student's individual learning styles. Next slide. Our findings will be shared with our AEL program grantees through an email summarizing the findings, along with a link to the detailed study report that will be available on our agency's website. Future research studies may also examine how CIS can impact distance learning students and their program performance. Next slide. In conclusion, we found that providing as many in-depth services as possible may help students feel more engaged and achieve positive results throughout the program journey. Next slide. If anyone would like more information about our study, you can contact me at the email address shown here, and our final report with much more detailed information will be available on our agency's website early next year. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Angie. And I'm going to turn it over to Larry with any questions.
Yes, thank you, Angie. That's very interesting study. As you know, I've been following you for a year now on that, and I thought it was a really, really useful, very, very useful and pertinent study in that a lot of programs are looking at this kind of approach now. Can you talk a little bit about how CS came about? Is it a state mandated? Is it voluntary? Are there any guidelines in Texas about how to do that, or states just do what they think is best for the student?
I do know some of these types of services are mandatory, like setting a goal or planned gain, the development of it's called IETC, the individual the individual training, education, and career plan. Some of these, very few are mandatory at orientation, but it was around PY 17, so July 17 through June 18, that these began to be more widely used, a lot of the additional services. And PY 18, we chose that because it was our most recent complete year, and we knew a lot of our program providers were giving some of these services.
Yeah, I'm sorry there. I have a question for you from, can you share how you define the intensity level of CIS programs when you conducted your study? I think I'm not sure I missed that part from Jeanette Sandler.
Yeah, it's in one of the slides. It's a little technical. I didn't want to get too bogged down specific. What we did for the intensive, if 75% or more of the provider's intake services fell into what we called an intensive group, which were their individual sites where the actual services are administered. If the majority of their services fall into one of these questions, like, do you allow students to meet their teachers during orientation? Do you ask about the student's individual learning style at orientation or the first 3 weeks of classroom instruction? If they answered, yes, we always do, most of the time we do, we categorize those as what we say intensive. And if they answered yes to those two options in 75% or more of those survey questions, we said that was an intensive group. They were in a moderate group if they fell between about 45 and 74%.
Yes, I'm going to ask Stephanie to go back to your slide so you can see. I know Jeanette wanted to see Jeanette wanted to see those questions or those things. So if you can go back, I think Stephanie's holding the PowerPoint. Yeah, back to like 10 slides, 11 and 12, I think it is.
Oh, yeah, the last one that has the specific services.
Yeah, so here you listed out the specific services, which I think is very helpful. I think we talked about this as being a very motivating thing for students and teachers as well, which is why I think you had your significant findings.
Yeah, and these things are, I'd say these are fairly easy to do. They're not really difficult. You can ask, the students, what kind of positive, negative experience have you had in school before? Being able to talk with some current students or people who have successfully gone through the program could be fairly easy to arrange. So we're really happy to find that there are some very practical, fairly easy things you can do that can possibly improve your student performance.
And are these done on an ongoing basis? And about how much time is put into it? Is there teachers that do it, or do you have specific staff that do this, that are intake staff or other staff?
It just depends. We did have that as a survey question. And people who had either dedicated staff or the teachers perform the orientation, we considered those two as part of our intensive level. But it can just vary by provider. Some of the larger ones have more dedicated staff.
I have a comment here from Mahalia, says your state director, that you have standard items that are required during orientation intake, and the survey was geared towards services that went above and beyond the minimum state policy. And the study is going to help make policy decisions around intake and orientation requirements, which is a really wonderful thing as a result of research, we always like to know our research is having an impact in some way. Here's another question. Did you also include transparency and the importance of keeping in touch with students even after they've concluded their education and goals?
No, we didn't, because we were mainly looking at how they start the program. If they get off to a strong start, if they feel connected and engaged, they have a very clear idea of their own goals and program expectations, did that help them get through the program more successfully? That is interesting, but that would be more of an after program study.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and here's another question. When programs learned a student's learning styles, how did they use that information? Did they share it with the students or provide strategies to the instructor? And does that affect how instruction was delivered at all?
That I'm not exactly sure, being that I'm not specifically on the policy side, but it probably could help them tailor their instruction better to the students, especially if it's a smaller class. Some of our smaller providers may be able to do that more successfully.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you have a lot to look at if you want to continue this line of research. And also, what did you get? About a third of your programs participating?
Yeah,
in the survey?
27%. And that was because we sent out, unfortunately, we sent out the first survey just a couple of days before the initial shutdowns in March. And we waited a couple of months and sent it out again in May. But still, a lot of the programs were very busy transitioning to almost full-time distance learning. So we were happy to get at least enough information to do a pertinent study.
Yeah, it looks like you got a good number. And were you able? What's happening now with the pandemic? Are providers still trying to provide services virtually, as far as the CIS services?
Yeah, I believe so. I think most things are probably still virtual.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, very, very interesting study for me. Anyone have any other questions for Angie, or anyone from your team, Angie, who'd like to say anything? Anyone have final comments before we move on?
No, we were just very excited to be able to participate in this and glad that we found some useful results.
Okay, well, I'm not seeing any more questions, so I think we'll move on, Stephanie, to Virginia.
Yes.
Thank you, Angie.
No, thanks, Angie. All right, Kate and Elizabeth.
All right, well, welcome everyone. I'm Elizabeth Severson-Irby, and my co-presenter is Kate Rolander, and we both work at the Virginia Adult Learning Resource Center. And we focused our research on exploring relationships between standards-based training, instructional practices, and learner outcomes. And this may sound familiar because Pennsylvania did a similar study, but we took a slightly different approach to what kind of data we used. So next slide, Kate. So our agenda basically is to go over the study synopsis and the context for why we chose our topic, and then to briefly go over our research questions. But we're going to spend most of our time discussing the methodology and how we collected our data. And then we'll briefly go over some of our preliminary findings and then discuss how the information can be used and possible future research. Next slide.
So I'll give a brief study synopsis. Our focus in the study was to develop a process to be able to explore a methodology where we can examine relationships between PD, instructional practices, and learner achievement. So in our exploration of these relationships, our preliminary findings show that for the year we analyzed, the teacher group who participated in College and Career Readiness Standards PD had higher MSG rates and higher EFL gains than the overall population of teachers that year. And teachers who participated in more of our CCRS PD, and we're defining more as 3 and more, utilized a wider variety of instructional practices than those who participated in fewer trainings. And that group we're defining as 1 or 2 trainings. So our rationale for the study, in the year we're analyzing, 2018, 2019, we had overall low MSG rates and did not meet our state target. Additionally, at the same time, we had an increased focus on standards-based instruction and a large-scale CCRS statewide PD effort. We also had limited data on and a limited capacity to explore how those CCRS trainings and all the effort we were putting into it relate to instructional practices. So this led us to a few questions. Oh, I'm clicking and it's not giving me my questions. There we go. Does our PD impact instructional practice? What does instruction look like in classrooms with teachers who participate in our CCRS PD? And how does instructional practice relate to learner outcomes? And then eventually we can look at how does PD participation relate to learner outcomes?
So based on the information that Kate just provided, we kind of narrowed that down and came up with these 2 research questions. So how do measurable skill gain rates and educational functioning level differ for teachers who participate in college and career readiness standards training? And then our second question was, what does CCRS implementation look like at varying levels of PD participation and MSG rates? So next slide. So this diagram shows the process that we use to collect data for our mixed method study. And we first gathered teacher level data for anyone who participated in CCRS training during the span of 2015 to 2018. And we were able to break people into number of trainings, but the majority of people participated in either 1, 2, or 3 trainings. That seemed to be where the bulk of our teachers were. And then due to some anomalies in NRS, we decided to narrow down our pool of teachers to those who taught a class in 2018 and 2019. And from there, we gathered MSG rates and EFL gains from the table 4 for each teacher. And we kept our grouping of teachers by number of CCRS trainings, but then we decided to break them down into those who met MSG target rates and those who did not meet those rates. And then along with analyzing the table 4 data, we created and sent out a survey, which helped us gather information on instructional practices. And the survey had both liquid items and open-ended items. And then once all the preliminary data was in, we were able to gather some initial findings, which we'll discuss in a little bit. Next slide.
There's just a little more detail about the data we used. We looked at several sets of data that don't generally talk to each other. First, we looked at our learning management system data to see who participated that year, how many trainings they had. And we also looked at the type of trainings that each participant engaged in, whether they were online or face-to-face. Then we looked at the NRS Table 4 data for those teachers in the 2018-2019 year, focusing on MSG rates and EFL gains. Then we developed and sent out a survey to learn more about instructional practices with those teachers, including scaled items based on the CCRS observation tool protocol. And then there are 2 open-ended questions to get more detail, more meat about what was actually happening in the classroom. That survey collection data collection is ongoing. We also forthcoming, we will do a member check on findings to check with teachers on how well our preliminary findings align with their experiences. And then those responses will become part of the study data for analysis.
So this slide shows the different ways, again, that we organized our data. So from the large pool of teachers that we have in Virginia, we ended up with 156, which is actually a rather small sampling, which is why we're really focusing on the fact that this is preliminary findings, because we need to get more data from teachers in order to really kind of validate that. But as stated, we ranked by first year of CCRS training and then the total number of trainings. We also decided to look at online and face-to-face training, although there was some overlap with teachers who participated in both types of training, so we weren't able to really look at those independently with the data that we have so far. And then for the NRS data, for this project, we only looked at the MSG rate and EFL gains by teacher. And then lastly, we did some subgroup divisions with CCRS participation rates So those with 3 or more trainings were placed in the high group, and those with 1 or 2 trainings were placed in a low group. And then, as mentioned previously, we also broke teachers into groups whether or not they met the MSG target rate or not for the 2018-19 school year. Next slide.
So our data analysis process, our study is really largely the development of this process for examining all those relationships between PD and instructional practices and then on learner outcomes, with the understanding that a lot of mediating factors influence how PD is received, what behaviors change as a result of PD, how those behaviors change, and what potential impacts those behavioral instructional changes may have on learner outcomes.
So again, just to note our preliminary findings, again, with developing this process, but due to the small sample size and the low survey response rate, we can only call these preliminary findings and we need more data to validate. But again, just to reiterate, so far, what we found is those who did participate in the CCRS PD did have higher MSG rates and EFL gains than the overall teacher population for 2018-2019. And then based on the survey response data that we had, so far we found that those who participated in 3 or more CCRS trainings did use a wider variety of instructional practices. Next slide. So the next few slides are just some graphs that show how we used our preliminary data. And so the purpose, again, was to kind of show the methodology, but just to kind of see some of the way that we organized our data and the findings that we have so far. So this one shows the EFL gains at different levels of CCRS training. So you can see we kind of broke them into groups. And there really wasn't that much of a difference between our groups. But those who did have 3 CCRS trainings had slightly higher EFL gains than those in the other groups. Next slide. And in this slide, again, it kind of mirrors the previous slide, but this one is showing CCRS trainings and MSG rates. And again, you can kind of see there really isn't that much of a difference between the groups. But again, for some reason, that group who had 3 trainings was a little bit higher than the other 3 groups, the other 3 subgroups. Next slide. And here, this is where you can see where we did similar breakouts to how we ended up coding our survey data, which Kate will talk about in a minute. So we have those with low number of CCRS trainings, which again was 1 or 2, who either met the MSG target or did not meet the MSG target. And then we also looked at those with high number of CCS training, those with 3 or more, who either met the MSG target or did not meet the target. And in this is a chi-square analysis, and just the expected number is the statistical projection, and the count is the actual number of participants in each group. So, for example, in this table, you can see that with the high CCRS group, for those who met, we had more teachers than expected, slightly more teachers than expected meet the MSG target rate, whereas when you look at the low CCRS training, there was slightly fewer teachers than expected who met the MSG target rate. Next slide. The next 2 slides is where we looked at online and face-to-face. And again, this was before COVID because it's 2018, 2019. And so it was before the shift for moving everything online. So again, we broke into high and low CCRS training groups. But you can see here that the MSG rates were similar regardless of how much of each type of training that teachers took. But again, it should be noted that there is some overlap with teachers taking both online and face-to-face. And so we did not have an independent sample of observations. So we can't make direct comparisons between online and face-to-face with the data that we have so far. Next slide. And again, this one is with online and face-to-face with EFL gains. And it's similar. It may look a little bit different. The differences might look a little bit more stark, but the scale is 2 EFL gains. So when you're looking at it that way, there really wasn't that much of a difference in EFL gains depending on online or face-to-face or how much training they had. Next slide.
So I'm going to talk about our survey to answer our second research question, which was what does CCR implementation look like at varying levels of PD participation and MSG rates? we developed a survey based on the observation protocols. Elizabeth touched briefly on how we broke we grouped teachers into these 4 kind of quadrants based on their CCRS participation and MSG rates. So we sent the survey out to a range of subgroups, grouped according to these levels, and by their by PD and by MSG rates. And we had 156 teachers who had both participated in the trainings and who had students in the 2018-2019 year. We developed the survey with 3 versions, one for English language arts, one for English proficiency, and another for math. And each had 3 sections, one for regular instructor information. And depending on the content area they chose, they received the appropriate version of the survey. And the Likert scale items, 10 to 12, adapted from the CCRS protocol, which would ask them to rate their behavior, how often they did something on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being never, don't do it, 5 being every class, do it. And then 2 open-ended questions on instructional practice to get a little more detail about what instruction really looks like rather than just the scaled item. So here are a couple sample questions, open-ended questions from the English language arts section. And this open-ended question provide at least one example of a unit, lesson, or activity that provides learners with opportunities to apply new concepts to authentic or adult-oriented context, aligns to one of the scaled items. The scaled item they would have in that survey is, I provide students with varied opportunities to apply what they are learning in authentic or practical adult-oriented contexts. And they would rate themselves 1 to 5. But then this gives us a little more detail because self-rating is a little, it's very subjective. So this gave us a little more information about what was actually happening. The other open-ended question there, just so you have an idea of what they look like, describe the kinds of supports and scaffolds you provide to learners who need them in order to understand content and reinforce learning. So respondents were asked to provide their emails and names, which were optional fields. So there were 12 identical versions of the survey sent out, and each survey was coded to align to one of the subgroups of teachers grouped by their PD participation and MSG rates. So we were able to tie survey responses to different rates of PD participation and MSG attainment. So we had some idea kind of what that would mean. Here are the results of the English language arts survey responses. On the left-hand side, that left column, you have the high CCRS training and high MSG group. And on the very right, you have low CCRS training and low MSG group. So first we looked at the scaled scores for each of the 3 content areas, and our data gathering is still ongoing, but by focusing on lower self-scored items, we can begin to see areas of instructional practice to strengthen for our PD. So for an example here, we have this average self-score of 1.5. I offer learners a broad range of texts on topics they are studying for sustained independent reading. All right, that's an area perhaps we need to work on and emphasize in PD. Another area here with an average self-score of 1, I design classroom activities that provide opportunities for learners to actively engage in class discussions or group projects. So again, we need to collect more data, but we're beginning to see some trends that might help us more efficiently and accurately target PD. Then we analyzed the 2 open-ended questions for strategies and themes related to teachers' approaches to instruction. We used an open coding approach, meaning that the codes arose from the data in the teacher's responses and were not predetermined codes. Because each survey was coded to align to the range of PD participation and MSG rates, we're able to group the responses in quadrants. And so as you can see here, there is more variety in instructional strategies for the high PD, high MSG group than for the others. So there were more strategies listed here, but also more counts of strategies than any of the other subgroups. And this is another way we can look at that data, to look at the types of strategies reported by the 4 subgroups. And here I'll highlight the high MSG level group. So everything in red are by teachers who at least made their MSG targets. The blue symbols represent strategies used by teachers with higher levels of CCRS PD, and the orange represent strategies volunteered by teachers who had lower levels. So as you can see, there are a lot more blue than orange. And this just means, from what we're seeing, preliminary data, that there's just a wider variety of instructional strategy use going on with teachers with more CCRS PD. Almost all listed the use of things like current topics and real life contexts to make instruction meaningful. But those with higher rates of CCRS participation and higher MSG rates listed as additional strategies not listed by those with lower CCR rates, like personal relevance or ongoing informal assessments, showing care, encouraging questioning, among others. So what we find here is that there is more varied strategy use going on in classrooms with higher PD participation and higher MSG rates. To reiterate, the findings are preliminary and data collection's ongoing.
So here we do have some implications for educators, and it's just kind of reiterating and summarizing what Kate just said. So again, our findings are suggesting that our CCRS training is associated with higher EFL gains and higher MSG percentage rates, although there are some mitigating factors that we need to keep in mind and that maybe we can explore in future research. And then the preliminary findings also show that CCRS training does influence the type of and variety of instructional practices used in the classroom. And again, kind of parsing out some of that more in future research will be helpful. Next slide.
Nope. And so implications for professional development. So we now have a process that we are in development of to strengthen our capacity to connect different data sets, to examine relationships between PD and performance, to more accurately target PD to demonstrated instructional skills gaps, to more accurately determine the influence of PD on instructional behaviors, to identify and highlight best practices among our teacher population. And this one is very important to me too, as someone who delivers PD, to expand our pool of teacher leaders to represent a wider range of instructional experiences by providing us with another way to learn about instructional practices across the state, and to also better meet the needs of teachers and learners through more accurately targeted technical assistance.
And lastly, we would just like to discuss what our plans are moving forward. So we would like to continue to use this process to look at other factors, such as comparing those who participated in CCRS training with those who did not. With the data that we had available to us, we were not able to make that comparison, but that would be useful to kind of make that comparison for future research. We would also need to collect a larger sample of instructors to validate our findings, both within the statistical data that we use, but also with our survey, because we had about a 7% response rate on our survey. And then possibly collecting data over multiple years to track individual instructors and kind of note some trends, especially as CCRS training, as they start to have more CCRS training. And then looking possibly at post-test rates from Table 4B, which would indicate student retention, and also maybe looking at teacher retention. And so moving forward, we hope that we can streamline our methodology and our process for analyzing teacher level data to create a more efficient way of gathering information from the NRS tables. And we also plan to continue gathering survey information and to use this as a check-in regarding how CCRS is being implemented. And as Kate just said, like, that information helps us as professional development providers to develop more targeted training. And so knowing those areas would be most beneficial for us, and then that will in turn benefit our teachers. Next slide.
And there we are.
And so that's all.
Welcome any questions.
Any questions?
Thank you, Kate and Elizabeth, very much for that really interesting presentation. I don't see any questions yet, but if anyone would like, please put your questions in the chat. But in the meantime, what I was particularly impressed with in your analysis was your look at what CCRS implementation looks like. Okay, let me put my video on so you can see me. But I had a question. I might have missed this because it was kind of fast. Can you go back to slide 19? Who's running your?
I am.
Kate, you're running? Yeah.
Wait, tell me when you get to it.
Okay, it's the one with a beautiful lines. There you go.
There.
What, could you explain that line again? That chart again? It's a little complicated.
Yeah, there are lots of things on it. So these are, there are 4 different groups of responses here. And these show the average scores for each item, each scaled item on the survey. And the 4 groups are mainly the 4 quadrants that we grouped participants into based on their CCRS participation, how many trainings, and their MSG rates, whether they were above or below the target.
So they're the high, low, like in the 2 slides before. It's the graphic depiction of that chart. If you go back 2 more slides.
Wait, sorry.
There you go. Whoop, that was it. You just want one more.
This one. Yeah.
There. Okay. So did you look at, I'm sorry if I missed this because it was fast, but did you look at, for example, somebody in the low MSG group, and maybe you didn't because you might not have a big enough sample size, to see how they implemented CCRS, if they did at all, and compare it? Because what I'm looking at here, what I'm trying to get at is, maybe it's those high MSG indicates better teaching in general, and maybe they do the CCRS anyway, even without your training. So is the way you could look at that would be to look at someone who didn't have a lot of training, or I mean, rather that had low MSG rather and had the training and they implemented. So were you able to look at that comparison?
We can do that, and I do apologize for this one being so busy, but I'm this slide. But if the second column here is high CCRS and kind of lower MSG rates, and then the third one there is low CCRS, meaning they didn't take a lot of training with us at all, and then high MSG rates. So those are people that didn't really do a lot of our training, but still had really good outcomes with their learners. So we are able to look at their individual responses and look at through the others, through kind of some of the theme analysis, what those folks did. So here you can also see in the lower rows here, low CCRS, what they did in their instructional.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's really interesting. You're able to go to that level of detail. I do have a question or two. Let me pull it up. Has COVID affected your study, what you're doing?
I believe it's really impacted our survey response rate. But, yeah, in a lot of ways, we don't have data right now that's easily accessible on teacher retention. So we don't know who of our sample is actually still teaching right now. And almost all of our trainings have gone virtual. We have done a lot of virtual training for years, so it's not a huge jump, but it does change how we can deliver these kinds of trainings. So I think going forward, it will be quite, we'll have to amend what we look at and how we look at it because of those changes, but finding out who's still here would be interesting as far as the teachers.
And teachers and students both, right?
Yeah.
And what's happening now? Have you been interrupted with training? Are you still trying to are you doing, I know it was virtual anyway, but are you still doing training?
I feel like we're training maybe even more than we used to. It does feel like we're training a lot. But I do know that there are enrollment and retention issues everywhere.
Yeah, of course. Anybody have any other questions? No? I don't see anything in my little chat box. We still have 10 and 15 minutes to go, so Stephanie, I see you popped up.
I did. I was going to ask if the presenters could put their video on for final questions for any of the teams.
Sorry, I've already redocked because my battery was running out.
No, it's okay.
But I'm here.
Okay, well, there we are. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions. I was going to do a little conclusion, and maybe I'll address a question to each of you. I know I didn't tell you this ahead of time, so I hope I don't put you on the spot or anything. But when we designed this is now the second time we've done this over several years, the ELC. As you know, in our project, the NRS support project that we do with OCTAE, Department of Ed, we promote a lot of our training is around using data in various ways and improving data quality so that you can use data. So that certainly was one of the goals of this type of training that we do, particularly, and we consider it sort of the higher level type of data use because it requires a lot more thought and developing a research question and using research techniques. So that's one of the purposes of this kind of training to bring to sort of train on research and evaluation, and we've done several trainings on that. But this is sort of the apex of that. The other thing is it's a professional development activity. So it's not only do we want the research to be done, it's to provide training on how to do research, and that's why we had it's hard to believe, but a year ago we were all together in person doing a training of November of 19. And that's what we did a lot of that then, and we've tried to do some coaching during the year. So a lot of it's PD. And then a third thing is it's a program improvement activity in a couple of ways. First, it makes you, when you're doing the research study, and this is true of all research, you have to think about not only your data and how it's worked and how it's configured and how you can use it, but also what you're doing as a state and as a program. So, and I think we saw that in these four presentations. Both of those, particularly, I know just the presentation we just had with Kate and Elizabeth about the various methodological hoops and tricks they had to do to get the data worthwhile, and the same with well, really all of you, and I'm thinking most of Kate and Elizabeth and Angie as well had to do quite a lot. I know the other states do. You have to manipulate your data a little bit. It's not really in the form you want. You don't have maybe the level of data you want. So that's one way that another in the third category of why we like this training and why we do this training. So that it helps you reflect on. So if you do get really hooked and interested in doing future research, you can see what you need to do it. It helps you maybe it makes you think about what you're doing as far as data collection and analysis in a way you haven't before. But it also makes you reflect on what you're doing in practice, professional development in this case, or in 3 of the states, and the CIS in the case of Texas. What is exactly being done? Why do we think it's effective? And if we find it is, how can we improve what we're doing? And so it's both a self-reflection, and then if you have findings, which all of you did have some really positive findings, you can then go kind of the iterative process of research, make changes, do more research, do more evaluation, and get additional ideas. So that's kind of our goal as the TA team to get all those things, all those gears in motion. So I just wanted to maybe as our final question or comment, if any of you would like to make, and I know we didn't tell you, I didn't tell you I was going to do this because beforehand, so maybe I don't want to put you on the spot, but which of those, any of those resonate with you? In other words, what did you find as the most useful about this activity as we now, at its end now a year later, for you as a state? What was the most useful? One of those 3, all of them, or something else? And I'll just open it up.
So, Christine from Pennsylvania, I think providing me with a template for how I could do future studies. I've already started to use the booklet that you gave out to us that we used sort of all through this process. I've already started to, I've started like a second project, like I'm in the thought process for the second project, and I'm using that booklet to sort of walk myself through the steps. So I think that the structure that you provided us was extremely useful for me, like will be extremely useful for me in the future.
Oh, that's nice. Thank you. Anyone else?
I'll go, Kate from Virginia. This has been a really great opportunity to devote the time and energy to developing a process for program improvement, I think, especially for how responsive our PD is, what kinds of PD, and how we engage with our teachers, hopefully to aid in retention, but definitely for learner outcomes. So otherwise, it's really hard to prioritize this kind of work when it's not on your, your scope for the year. So this was a great opportunity to delve into this kind of exploration for program improvement.
Great. Yeah, anybody else?
This is Kathy from Illinois, and just to kind of support what was said, the ability to have time to focus on evaluation, not only for the process we were looking at, but to develop a process across all of our professional development and areas so that we can continue on that continuous improvement. But in addition to the model that you gave for us to use and the networking with the other states and the multiple meetings that we had a chance to hear what they're doing and how they were doing it would be something that I think is very, very worthwhile in future processes so that you can learn from your peers. And I would also say that the technical assistance that you provided in how to conduct the evaluation and how to actually interpret what you're getting as a result and how to really fine tune that research so you can get good results. You don't get good results without a good research question. So I think that all of these processes combined make this a very worthwhile project. But I would caution us from saying one piece is more important than another, because without the technical assistance that supports the resource that you gave us, it becomes a little bit more challenging to implement the research. Without the guidance on how to design the surveys, all of these pieces are interconnected.
Okay. Are you done? Or you just suddenly went silent?
Oh, sorry. No, I have really bad internet. It's windy where I live, and every time the wind blows, I lose internet. Not kidding. But I just wanted to kind of reiterate that it's a process that's valuable.
Yeah, I think that is definitely part of research. Is our processes or you learn a lot from the process as well, from the, what's the cliche, the journey as well as the destination. Yeah. Anybody else have any final words? We're at the end of our 13-month project for us on the team, and we had about 50, I think excluding us, about 55 people listening to us today all over the country.
We should commend the state teams because you put a lot of time and thought into your projects during COVID. You actually carried out these studies during a pandemic, and you did an amazing job. And I think we've all learned a lot. We're still learning. I know some of the studies are still underway, but we really appreciate your dedication and your contribution to the field. And I know that some of you plan to release reports on your website, and we can link to those on the NRS website. And we also encourage you to do presentations at places like COABE, do other types of publications, and just to get more information out there.
Yes,
Larry?
and Kate, I think you're the one who said that you had to do it on your own, and that is, I'm very impressed with that also, that you, all of you, were able to keep doing this, even though, it's an extra thing to do in addition, and as Stephanie said, even in this kind of trying times of COVID as well. So congratulations to all of you. I hope you benefited from it. I did have a comment here. Jeanette wanted to know, how did this all happen? Well, what happened is we had what we call a targeted training, a special, which is a limited training. Every year we have our regional trainings where all the states are invited to participate. In the targeted trainings, we ask for people to write an application and to in this case, submit an idea and a plan and tell us what they were going to work on and tell us who's going to work on it. And then we had as I said, a face-to-face training to kick it off, a 3-day session in Crystal City last November when we were all used to be able to get together. And we went over the basics of research and had each state present their plan and work on their plan. And then we followed, we had a year of periodic coaching, check-ins with each state, Emily, myself, and Stephanie. Is anyone else involved in the coaching? I think it was mostly the three of us. And working with each team every couple of months. And we had a couple of check-in progress webinars. And that's how we did it. Jeanette asked that. And I don't know if we aren't planning to do this again in the near future, but we have similar activities that if you want to take advantage of those, we'll have other, of course, we're always having training and webinars. Just see, we have, thank you for the panelists. And I'm looking what else we have on the chat.
Encourage people in the state offices to sign up for any future evaluation learning communities or similar targeted training. And we can work with you to learn how to do your own studies. And then I think the last thing we wanted to say, besides thank you for coming, is to please complete the evaluation on your way out. There's a link to that in the chat, and I think it will also show up when you go to leave the meeting. So thank you, everybody.
Yes, and there's also thank yous and kudos to our panelists. So take a look at those, pat yourself on the back, and thank you. It's been a real pleasure working with you over this last year. I know we all enjoyed it, and I hope you especially enjoyed it since you did most of the work. And I think you really not only contributed to the research base in adult ed, because as you know, there isn't much research, and particularly these are topics that are of great interest since so many people, so many states and so many resources are put in PD. And I know the whole CIS issue is one of great interest right now as well. So thank you for that. I hope you also got benefited from the PD and the program improvement focus that we try to put to it too. So thank you very much. Have a great holiday. I'm not seeing any more questions, so I guess we'll be done a little bit early.
All right. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye, and thank you.
Thanks, Air.
Bye-bye.